Welcome to Managing Toxic Stress and Burnout, 7 Types of Rest. My name is Merlene Tucker, and I'll be running this Dialogue for Health web forum alongside my colleague Jeff Bornstein. Thank you to our partner for today's event, the National Overdose Prevention Network, a program of the PHI Center for Health, Leadership, and Impact. Let's meet the moderator of today's event, Amy Max. Amy Max is the program manager for the PHI Center for Health, Leadership, and Impact. She oversees the California and National Overdose Prevention Networks, which provide tools, resources, and learning opportunities for local leaders tackling the overdose crisis in their communities. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much, Marlene. Thank you. And hello, everyone. We are so glad that so many of you have signed up for today's webinar. It's fantastic to see the turnout. If you are new to events hosted by the National Overdose Prevention Network, or NOPN, then welcome to our national learning community. We are the largest learning network dedicated to those working in the field of overdose prevention in the country. And our goal is to support those of you working in substance use prevention, treatment, and harm reduction with the tools and learning opportunities you need to be as effective as possible as you work hard to save lives in your community. So be sure to go to our website if you haven't already. It's at nopn.org, nopn.org, and check out our resource library and list of trending topics. We also post recordings and slides from our past events, including the webinar we held last month on harm reduction strategies for people who use fentanyl. And by attending today's session, we'll add you to our monthly digest, which includes resources and our list of upcoming events. So again, go to nopn.org and check us out if you are new to this learning community. And if there is a specific topic or area where you feel like you could use more support, feel free to email us at nopn@healthleadership.org. We love to hear from those of you in the field in this national learning community, and we want to provide content that is as useful to you as possible. So please do reach out to us if there's any other support or topics that we can provide. And on that note, let's go on to the next slide. We know that the work that you do in overdose prevention is hard. It's intense, it's emotional, it's taxing, and we also know burnout is real. So we must work to prioritize and protect ourselves and our well-being. Your emotional, physical, and mental well-being really do matter. And so that's a really important topic for us in this national learning community and an area that we want to provide lots of support to you on. And that's why we brought back today's speaker to talk about some practical things you can do to take care of yourself and as a result, continue your life-saving work to help those around you. So today, our objectives are for you to learn how the added stressors brought on by the pandemic and natural disasters and systemic racism, among other things, have caused unprecedented levels of toxic stress and burnout, some strategies you can use to address burnout within yourself, and the types of rest that you can use and how to implement them in a realistic and practical way within your life to support yourself and those around you. For our agenda today, we'll have a couple poll questions just to better understand who is out here in the virtual audience. Then we'll have a presentation and certainly some opportunity for Q&A that you can be sending in to our presenter during the presentation as well. Excited to welcome back today's speaker who we've had here in the past, Brooke Briggance. We do have a huge audience today, so feel free to use your emoji reactions on Zoom at any point during her presentation if you want to let Brooke know how you're feeling about the material that she's presenting, and certainly you can put things into the chat as well. We love to hear from you. Brooke comes from a multi-sector background in health, direct impact programming for children, youth, and families, and public education nonprofit work. She is the program director for the Cypress Resilience Project and deputy director of Faces for the Future Coalition, which are both projects of the Public Health Institute. And she's also a certified trainer in trauma-informed systems and practice, and has certified hundreds of members of this network, this learning network, in mental health first aid. So thank you so much, Brooke, for coming back and joining us today, and take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Amy. And I am going to love the floating emojis, by the way. This is a whole new thing for me. So this is awesome. Thank you, everyone, for the love. I'm totally having it. We're already celebrating, and I haven't even talked yet. That's so cool. All right. Hey, everyone. It's good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to ask for a couple of things from the team. First of all, I know that we have some other resources for today's workshop, and I'd love to have those posted in the chat for you all to use. I know that if you follow this link, you're going to see a resource guide, but you're also going to see a basically like a graphic organizer for your thoughts. Sometimes when I present on this topic, people like to pull that up. It's actually a fillable PDF. And you can have it open. And part of what I'm going to talk to you today about is that we can't really prescribe wellness to you, because it's really all about your own lived experience and what works for your brain and what doesn't work for your brain. And so people find that really helpful to sort of jot down some ideas while I'm talking, just to sort of think through how am I going to apply what's being said today to me specifically, because this is all about your brain and how your brain works. And so I can't tell you what to do. You're going to have to kind of find your way into the material yourself. And so it can be very helpful to use that graphic organizer while we are in this workshop. So that's a resource for you there. If you're on the move or something like that, you can always use it later, but it is a good print material for you to have. And it's a good set of reminders for some of the things that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in and start sharing screen. And we have a lot to cover today. Even though we have a whole hour together, we have a lot to discuss. One of the things that I like to start with is just sort of this understanding that, I hope we are normalizing what we've all been through. The reality is that, a lot of us grew up with this idea that other people have it worse than us. And certainly in the work that we do, right? And thinking through overdose prevention and all of the work and community that I know a lot of you are engaged in, that's something that, we're sort of inundated every day with people who may have it worse than us. And when that happens, a lot of times we get in this mindset that, well, if other people have it worse than me, I shouldn't complain. I should be able to pull myself out of whatever I'm experiencing or feeling. And the reality is, I hope that you'll see very quickly today that that's not really going to be helpful. And it actually isn't really even true neurologically. We're all going through very heightened levels of stress and trauma. And it's important for us to acknowledge that, so that we can then do something about it, right? I'm actually, even though the things I talk about are, people are like, how do you talk about trauma all day? And I'm always like, yeah, but it's really hopeful, because once I know, and once I understand what is happening in the brain and why it's happening that way, I can actually do something about it. So I find it to be uplifting, but I do think that sometimes we get into this sort of headspace of, if other people have it worse than us, we shouldn't be looking at our own wellness. And I need to disabuse us of that. That's going to be a really important thing for us to come to terms with, that we cannot have gone through all of the things that we're going through. You cannot do the work that you're doing and not have it impact you physically, emotionally, spiritually, socially. It is going to have impact. And I think that even if you have it relatively good, let's say you have good relationships at home and you have safe space, and you like your job and you like the people you work with, even then, a lot of the things that we're dealing with systemically, things like the pandemic and climate change, a lot of those things that Amy mentioned, those are all very real. And so I just like to start with this quote and just remind us that we need to normalize this experience and try to really think concretely about, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to actually manage this? One of the things that we have to understand is that it's important to have this conversation now, right? We know that all sorts of markers for wellness are they're being impacted. So, for example, we know that mental health diagnoses are going up. We know that, for example, post-COVID, new diagnoses of hypertension are going up. We know that new diagnoses of things like type 1 diabetes are going up. it's taking its toll. And as we continue to do this work on overdose prevention, we need to have some strategies. And we need to be talking about what a trauma-informed system really means. Now, that's a loaded, kind of set of principles in a lot of ways, right? We'll talk about organizational support in just a moment. But that idea, what is trauma-informed? That's a really important thing, and it's an important conversation. We're not going to talk about it so much today. It means different things to different people. What does trauma-informed practice mean? Even the word trauma. I'm going to give us a definition in just a moment to see if we can have a shared mental model for our discussion today. But we know that systems are not trauma-informed. Most of them aren't. We know that the folks we're supporting are engaged in those systems. A lot of times when I'm talking to folks about toxic stress and burnout, what we end up talking about is moral wounding. This grief that we have, that we hold in our bodies, in our souls, that systems fail the people we're trying to help. And we see it every day. And that in and of itself is a stress for us. The moral wounding that comes from lack of resources, or the ways in which systems are traumatizing people. I'm trying so hard to help, and I can't get them housing, or I can't connect them to the care I know they need and deserve. And that system is failing that family. That education system is failing that child, and I care about the young people I serve so much. So that moral wounding in and of itself is a stressor for us, and it can feel like, gosh, what am I supposed to do about that, right? So this important conversation, it's always been important, but I think it is even more so now. And those systems, we have to have this conversation about, like, how are we creating safe haven? What are we doing together collectively as a community to create safety? And you'll hear why safety is so important to us in just a minute. So I want to go to that definition of trauma, and again, sort of have this shared mental model. This is the definition that I use in the work that I do. And you can see I'm going to point out a couple of things that I think are of note. First of all, trauma, often we think of it as acute trauma, that one big thing that happened. And that certainly is trauma. That can be someone's experience. I was in the car accident, or I lost my housing. Certainly, we know those things can be true. Trauma also, though, is a series of events and a set of circumstances. And that's really important, because the brain doesn't really care if it's a big event or a set of circumstances. It's going to put us into our stress and survival response mode as soon as it perceives a threat. When it perceives threat, it kicks us into those responses, those survival responses. And it does that even if I'm living in a set of circumstances. This is part of the reason why, for example, when you think of adverse childhood experiences, right? A lot of those adverse childhood experiences are about the conditions that someone was living in prior to the age of 18. What was home life like? Even if you think about it, for those of you who have some familiarity about ACE screening, there's a question in there. Did you grow up in a house where you just didn't think people had each other's back? That's a set of circumstances, but it's perceived by the brain as a threat. Therefore, it becomes trauma. So when I'm saying I think we need to own this definition, I mean, we all know that this gets overused, right, in social media and all of that sort of thing, that word trauma. But when we're looking at an event, a series of events, and a set of circumstances, then I think we start to normalize what we've all been going through, because we are living through a set of circumstances that is constantly and persistently putting us in this stress response. The other thing I like to point out in this definition is that trauma is holistic. We feel it in all of the parts of our being, all of the parts of who we are. And, oftentimes I think we think of it as physical only, and it certainly can be physical. It's not to take away from that, but it's also social, emotional, it's that spiritual well-being. And I think that it's important for us to acknowledge that, because if I'm saying that to you, then remember what I said is we've got to know what happened in order to try to address it. And if I am, say, only addressing my physical well-being, but not my social, emotional, and spiritual well-being, I can tell you right now, you're probably not going to feel as healed from that toxic, sort of series of events or set of circumstances as you might otherwise. And so a lot of when you think about self-care, a lot of people are like, put yourself in the bubble bath. Don't forget to hike, like all these kinds of things. And I'm like, well, actually, there's more to it than that, because the trauma itself is holistic. So physical responses to it are going to help us in some regard, but not all regards. And so we want to be thinking about a holistic approach to our well-being. Physical is certainly a part of that, but it isn't the only part. So I would like to notice that as well. And then it is so important to think about trauma as being overwhelming. Right? It's literally tapping our resources. A lot of times people will say, when I'm talking to them about toxic stress and burnout, like, I don't have any gas in the tank, right? It's that feeling of like, there's no gas left. And that means we're tapped out. We don't have those resources to cope. And that can happen to an individual. It can happen to a community. It can happen to a family. And so there's reality here around what it feels like to not have gas in the tank. And I'm going to tell you in just a few minutes why I don't like the term self-care, but that's a big reason, right? Because if I'm already tapped out, if I'm already burned out, and then you come at me with some BS about how don't forget to practice self-care, I'm going to be like not having that, because I just told you I have no gas in the tank. Right. And so a lot of times what happens in organizations is people come and they're like, oh, but don't forget to practice self-care. Like, you should totally do like a bubble bath this weekend. And I'm like, yeah, but I just told you I don't have it right now. Right. And it feels like it puts the onus back on us, and it puts it back on me. Like, if I'm not doing it well enough, it's just one more thing I'm failing at. Right. And so we're going to talk instead about community care. It doesn't mean that there's not things that you shouldn't keep in mind about your wellness. But I think that feeling of like, I'm already tapped out, now go practice self-care, it feels kind of disingenuous to me. And it feels like something I think we need to address. And we don't want to get so overwhelmed and feel so frustrated by that terminology that we aren't taking care of the things we can take care of. And there are some things we can do that we'll talk about. So this is what's happening in your brain when you are dealing with trauma or those sets of circumstances that are activating your stress response. This part of your brain, that prefrontal cortex, it's in charge of executive function. It's in charge of decision making. It doesn't mean it's a higher level of processing. It just means it's different. But I always say it's where we do algebra and build bridges, right? It's conceptual thinking. It's a lot of our language. It is where a lot of memory is. It continues to develop until age 25, 26 years old. So if you support young people, then you are asking yourself, what were they thinking? They weren't, not yet. they're still cooking. And so that part of the brain is implicated in a lot of different sort of behavior modifications. And sort of like, this is also where I kind of put restraint on myself, right? I don't say all that stuff that I'm, not supposed to say in the meeting. This part of the brain is the limbic system. It has lots of different, things, components, but we call it the limbic system. It basically is the hub of survival and emotion. And it's incredibly important. It's doing a couple different things. First of all, it is analyzing data. So it's getting data from all of my senses, what I hear, what I smell, what I touch, what touches me. And when it senses a threat, it's going to activate. And when it activates, it literally takes over. And so that part of the brain, we have PET scan images of people under high levels of stress where the prefrontal cortex goes offline and the limbic system starts to light up. It's the part of the brain that starts to take over. Aside from toxic stress and burnout, one of my most popular workshops right now is de-escalation. Why? Because everyone's popping off. And so we do a lot of conversation about, hey, what happens in someone when they are in that state of survival and that limbic system has taken over and they're not thinking very clearly, they're in survival mode. How in the heck am I going to calm that situation down so that I can get that prefrontal cortex back online? I can have a conversation with them about whatever it was that set us off in the first place without adding to that person's stress. But this is what's happening. A lot of us are more irritable. A lot of us are having different kinds of reactions. Sometimes the higher your stress level, the more forgetful you'll become. Why are you forgetful? Because this part went dark. And so when you are super stressed and you're like sending the email without the attachment, or you can't find your keys, or like all those things, and you're like, but I'm a highly competent person. Like, what is my problem right now? The problem is your prefrontal cortex is super stressed. It's going dark. Your limbic system is taking over. And this is essentially the brain activity that's implicated when we're talking about toxic stress, managing burnout. And here's some of the stuff that happens. So when you are in that state, your body is flooded with a ton of stress chemicals, right? Because your brain is like, hey, we're in survival mode right now. And if I'm in survival mode, that means I got to get ready to fight something or run away for something. There's a threat to me. And when I'm in that survival mode, your brain is going to release I call them gas pedal chemicals, right? They're chemicals that put on the gas. And they're activators and they do a lot of different things. So I'm sure if we were just hanging out and chatting on a couch or something, or we went out and got coffee, some of this stuff is probably going to look pretty familiar to people, especially now. So if you're dealing with a lot of stress and you're kind of dealing with burnout, there's some of this stuff that I am sure you're experiencing. So let's talk about a couple. And I can kind of give you a little bit of like, hey, this is why that's happening. So for example, sleep disruption. Sleep is one of the first things to go. Like that goes right away whenever we're stressed. But what did I just say those chemicals are? They're gas pedal chemicals, right? So a lot of times what's going to happen is the more stress I have, the more gas pedal chemicals I have when I'm trying to go to bed. Maybe I'm struggling to get to sleep, or maybe I got to sleep, but then something wakes me up in the night and I can't get back to sleep. And so we start to see people with lots and lots of sleep disruption. And then you're just even more tired the next day, right? And for the work that y'all do, I know that you can't be doing that over and over and over again without it heading toward burnout. Attention and concentration, issues with memory. I just said, why is that happening? This part of your brain went dark. This part is taking over. That irritability, same kind of thing. We know that a lot of times people will, one of the things that people say is, oh, I carry stress in my shoulders or in my neck or something like that. And everyone, I can tell even on Zoom meetings, like how stressed out people are because they're going like this. If I am, the way that I think about this is if there's a bear coming toward me and I need to get ready to fight or to run away, I have to, my body's full of these gas pedal chemicals. One of the things that those chemicals do is they send a message to my muscles to contract. So it's completely reasonable as you're sitting there and you're doing this work that you're going to start to have muscle spasms or aches and pains, a lot of that stuff. It's like 80% of emergency room visits for low back pain include a mental health component. Right? There's a reason why our muscles are tense and sore and spasming. Lots of people gain weight. If the bear is coming and I'm like full of all these gas pedal chemicals, one of the things that happens is my body is reprioritizing all of my different bodily functions, and metabolism is one of the things. They're like, yeah, I don't need to worry about that bagel that you ate. Like, I'm just not even about that right now. I'm just interested in this threat. And so you can see sometimes people will gain weight, or maybe they'll have cravings. I bet if, sometimes that, if I had you again on the couch or whatever, and we were hanging out, I also could find out like who's craving carbs and sugar, like when you get stressed, like all that comfort food eating, like, why do we crave that stuff? Well, because part of what that messaging is from those gas pedal chemicals is, hey, there's a threat. We need cheap energy to deal with that threat. And so we want to bulk up. We want to get that cheap energy. We need to be able to run or to fight that thing. And so now I'm thinking to myself, like French fries on ice cream is kind of like not a bad idea. Like, why don't we do that more often, right? Well, that's because I'm craving that kind of crap, because in my brain, it's trying to get ready to fight a threat, right? Sometimes it happens the opposite for folks. Sometimes they get nauseated. We hear a lot about, I get stomach aches. Even migraines, for example, in young people can show up as a stomach ache, but stomach aches, sometimes people drop weight. I always know if I drop weight really fast, I'm probably grieving. Like when I grieve life events in my life, man, I like, bam, I drop weight super fast. And if I'm happy, I'm always like, look like I look now. But if I'm grieving, I drop weight fast. And part of the reason for that is, again, in that reprioritization, maybe I am nauseated. Maybe my stomach feels upset and I don't feel like eating. My appetite might be really, really low. And so people can drop weight too. All those different things. You can see now why trauma is directly related to 6 leading causes of death: hypertension, diabetes, autoimmune diseases. It's because these gas pedal chemicals are strong and they're having this big, huge impact on our organ systems. If you think about that, if I'm in that heightened state of stress, that blood pressure is going to go up. There's that hypertension diagnosis I was talking about. If it's messing with my immune system, there I've got autoimmune diseases, right? And so there's a lot of stuff here to pay attention to. If you're noticing some of these things, I would say, let's look at stress. And one of the things that I can say to you is that this can't be a one-size-fits-all strategy. I can't tell you because I don't know what your stressors are. Your brain is reacting to different things differently than someone else might. The neural pathway for trauma is actually deeper in the brain, the more helpless you feel in the situation. I find that interesting because some of us might feel super helpless in some situations and not as helpless as other people might in other situations. So it's also our sense of our ability to cope, right? Like, I always call it the I got this feeling. If I have a super stressful situation, but I have the I got this feeling, my brain is going to react really differently than someone who doesn't have that feeling. So it can't be a one-size-fits-all strategy, and everybody's lived experience is different. You come to this work in overdose prevention with your own lived experiences. And some of those are intergenerational for you. Some of them are in your communities. Some of them are in your families. And some of them are from your own experience. And so when you come to this conversation about toxic stress and burnout, you need to bring all of that with you to try to help you find a solution. But nobody on Instagram, if they tell you like, oh, you should just do this, you can stop listening. You have my permission. Don't listen to them. You need to come up with your own strategy because that's actually the only thing that's going to work. So let's think proactively. Now, what do I do, right? Okay, well, the first thing I got to think of is the stressors themselves. And look, I'm not naive about this. I know people are always like, Brooke, you want me to get stressors out of my life, like blah, blah, blah. Like, I can't even do that. And like, I need my job and I need this. And I get it. I'm not naive about it. I know that we can't remove all of the stressors, but you can remove some. I challenge you, you can remove some. There are some of you that are exposing yourself to some things that you don't need to see. Do you need the 24/7 news loop? Right. That's one of the things that people can maybe pull back from a little bit. Maybe try setting a timer. I'm going to engage in watching the news for 30 minutes. I still want to be informed, but watching the loop is too stressful for me. Sometimes this may be about drawing some boundaries. It may be assessing your relationships. And look, that can be a whole spectrum. It can be just like, hey, I'm not going to hang out with you right now, all the way to, I don't think I want to be around you, right? And so that's really important. There's a whole spectrum of stuff. I have a friend who she's just judgy. She's just a judgy person. And I know if I'm going through a super stressful time, that's not the person to hang out with right now, because I'm just going to feel that more and it's going to cause me more stress. So I always call her a sunny day friend. That's a person who, like, if I'm having a great day, then I can hang out with that person. But if I'm not having a great day, that's not the person I call. She's a sunny day friend. Right. So you can actually like categorize people a little bit. Rainy day friend, sunny day friend. I also call some people pinky swear friend. A pinky swear friend is a person that you can tell the absolute truth to. Right. No matter where you are, no matter how you're doing, that's the pinky swear promise, right? Is that we are 100% ourselves with each other and we have 100% truthfulness. And that person is definitely something you want to be around. But, the sunny day friend, maybe not so much. So I would challenge you to try to think about where you are in those spectrums. And then really think about safety, environments that feel safe and unsafe. So an unsafe environment, remember, is a set of circumstances that's just going to keep you in the stress response. And so if there are situations where you don't feel holistically safe, and remember, safety is not just physical, that, safety and trauma, those are holistically experienced. So if I don't feel mentally, socially, spiritually safe here, I may as well not be physically safe either. And I know that seems like, whoa, Brooke, that's a lot to say, but go back to those adverse childhood experience score sheets that some of you know, those ACEs score sheets. Remember, there's stuff in there like someone was verbally abusive. People didn't feel like you didn't feel like you had someone's back or someone had your back. Those things matter to the brain. And so it's not enough to just think about physical safety when I'm trying to consider what safe means to me in an environment. And so when you're drawing those boundaries, remember I said it's a spectrum. It may be like, hey, over here is just like sunny day friend. I'm not going to hang out with her, but I can hang out with her next week, all the way to, you know what, I think I don't want to be in this environment any longer because it doesn't feel safe for me. And I know that that's going to have long-term physical consequences for me because I already know that event, the series of events and the set of circumstances is directly related to 6 leading causes of death. And so if I know that, it's no different than making a different kind of health decision for yourself. Like, I don't want to be around smokers or I want to eat healthy. This is something, safety for me is a prerequisite for wellness. If we don't have that, we have to think about how to get more of it. I've got a question here about what advice can you give for teenagers facing depression and social anxiety? That's such a strong question. And I know all of us are thinking a lot about young people right now. A lot of studies have been coming out about young people and, the mental health challenges they're facing. I would strongly suggest connecting them to some kind of care. And again, I am not naive. I know that we have a massive workforce shortage, let alone a multilingual, multicultural workforce to try to address the needs of all of us and even more so our young people. But I would still try to connect that young person to some kind of professional care. When we teach mental health first aid certification, that's what we're always saying is we really want that young person to have that safe space. The social anxiety is super common. That is, again, it's a set of circumstances, right? So trauma, when we've put them in these, we go home for shelter in place, and then we come back out, and then we go back in, and then we go back out, and then you go back in, and they've been through a lot. And as a parent of young people, I know how tough that is. So again, I would strongly suggest connecting them to some kind of professional care. But I want to acknowledge, I know that that's easier said than done. When we're thinking then about rest, so I'm trying to remove stressors, and that's the part of the conversation nobody likes to talk about, right? Because they're like, Brooke, I thought I was here to put stuff in, not take stuff out. But the reality is you got to take some stuff out before you can put the good stuff in. The way that I think about that, a metaphor that I use is like, if you have bad asthma, and you're sitting in a room full of people smoking 3 packs a day, Monday through Friday, and then you get to Saturday and Sunday and you think some fresh air, you're going to go outside and breathe fresh air. How's your asthma doing? Probably not so good, right? Because you haven't actually removed enough of the stressor in the first place to try to, add something good like fresh air in on the weekend. So that's kind of what burnout is to me, is people who are white knuckling it through Monday through Friday, and you think the weekend's going to save your butt, and it's not, right? Because you literally are creating a system and condition where your wellness is not being supported consistently throughout the week. So you can't white knuckle it through Monday through Friday and hope Saturday and Sunday is going to save you. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But when you're taking stuff out, you want to add some stuff in. And these types of rest, I think, are helpful. So one of the things that we think about is like, oh, I need to sleep. And certainly that could be true. But there's also different kinds of rest. And these are rests that your brain needs in order to feel happy and whole and in balance, which is really what you're hoping for, right? You want that limbic system and the executive function to be in balance and happy-go-lucky. Physical rest, what that can mean, obviously, that can be sleep, sure, but it also can be active and passive. So it may be exercise for you. Maybe it's doing something physical that brings you joy. So I always remember my grandma June in the garden. You could always tell like that was her haven, right? Like she went out to the garden. Now she was active. She was digging at the weeds, and you could always tell when she was mad. She'd be like out there going at some kind of weed. But the reality was that was restful for her. She felt better. She felt more whole when she came back. And so that physical rest, it doesn't mean that you're sedentary. It means that you are doing something physical, but something that brings you joy. Right. For some of us, it might be cooking something. It might be walking the dog. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to become a gym rat, but maybe you choose that. But it does mean I'm physical, I'm moving, but I'm engaged in something that brings me joy. Mental rest. If we were sitting here having tea or coffee together, you can show me with your emojis. How many of you have that list going in your head 24/7, where it's just like, and then I have to do this, and then I have to do that, and then I gotta do this, and like, yeah, okay, well, there you are. Oh no. Yeah, so there's gotta be some mental rest, right? You gotta turn that list off somehow. There's a couple little tricks that you can do for this. Sometimes journaling can really help. So I just want to get it all out there. Sometimes talking to somebody about it can help. This is where having a therapist can be helpful. You can just, there goes the list. Sometimes it can be really helpful if you have sleep disruption. You can set a timer before you go to sleep and write down everything you're thinking as fast as you can and crumple it up, throw it away, and then try your sleep pattern. pattern, right? So you're just trying to get it all out. But there's there's a lot of us who have that kind of ongoing list. And sometimes what can help is if we give our brains something else to pay attention to, right? Listening to that podcast or falling asleep to a white noise machine or something like that can also help turn off that kind of ongoing dialogue that we have. Sensory rest is so important because remember, what did I say your limbic system's doing? It's analyzing all the data that you're getting in. And if it's already stressed out, and what the secret about the limbic system is that it has a harder time going to baseline, and it gets more sensitive over time. Right. And so the more we're inundating it, that is it, we're giving it too much. It's overload. So have you ever had that where you have, for example, maybe you've had a really big day and then someone like turns the radio up too high and you're like, whoa, that is too much for me right now, right? My kid and I always have that debate because he comes in with the wireless speaker, like, I want you to listen to this. And I'm like, not right now, bud, like not right now. That's a huge issue, right? So we want to try to turn things off a little bit, maybe less screen time, less action. For some people, though, going cold turkey and going to complete silence can be really difficult. Because complete silence can kind of leave us alone with that like list in our heads, right? And so sometimes we may need a little bit of noise in the background, something to keep that part of our brain a little bit occupied, but not something that is inundating us. And so think about your screen time, think about the sensory overload, maybe give yourself some time to walk away from that. Again, going outside, being in nature, those sorts of things can be very helpful. Creative rest. Creative rest is basically doing something that is, is making stuff. It doesn't have to be art. Sometimes people are like, oh, but, I'm not an artist. You don't have to be an artist. You don't have to be some fancy, Picasso person. It's about doing something that you're creating something that is expressive of who you are. So it may be an amazing meal. It could be like, I love to knit. That's something I do for me. I'm making a blanket right now. Some people it's growing something. Some people it might be some other kind of hobby. It may also be expressing yourself. Some people, maybe they write poetry or they're engaged in making music, whatever that is for you, that is an important piece. And remember, part of it, that limbic system is emotion. So part of what we're trying to do is also release emotion, and creativity helps us do that. It's cathartic. It releases emotion. And so creative rest can be very helpful. I've got a couple questions here. How do we do this when we're currently burned out? I'll answer that in just a second, I think, because we're going to talk about what I call micro routines. And then I see, what's the best, let's see. What do you do when you and your child or partner have a disconnect around sensory rest? Yeah, I'm just really clear with whomever I'm living with that that too much sensory stimulation is going to make me irritable, and that I need a little bit of a break. And so that's something that's a boundary that I ask for from Elijah, my son, and to say, look, I would like to hear that music, but right now I'm still processing my day and that feels really a lot for me. Would it be okay with you if I listen to that tomorrow morning when I have more capacity? Right. So I don't say, I don't want to listen to it. I want to hear what you want to share with me. I just am not in the best space to do it right now. Could we do it tomorrow when I have more? The language I use is gas in my tank. Can we do that when I have more gas in my tank? Because I want to hear this thing you want to share. I just can't do it right now. Emotional rest. Now that is, really important. This is where some of the boundaries come from, right? This is around making sure we're connected to those people who have our back. It's about making sure we're not connecting to the sunny day friends. We're hanging out with the people that we know have our back. It's also making sure that we are taking care of those emotions. Remember, limbic system is survival, but it's also emotion. And so we are needing to connect to emotion, and we're needing to feel emotion. And that can be really scary, especially for those of us who have trauma backgrounds. So I have a trauma background, and I understand that, especially at different points in my life, there were times where I felt like, if I actually feel these feelings, will I ever be able to come out of it? And that is where it can be very helpful to have some sort of meditative or mindfulness practice. It can be helpful to connect to someone who's a professional who can help you process emotion in safe space. I know this is difficult for people, for those of us who have trauma backgrounds, but it is important to process emotion. Otherwise, the body is going to hold on to it as a continued stressor. Social rest, and this one, sometimes you're going to have to say no, especially if you are a little more introverted, or you are in a situation where those, sunny day friends are asking you out and you're like, you know what, not right now. Make an excuse. Like, it's okay to stay home. It's okay to need some time, maybe just with one or two people and not the big crowd. My ex-husband and I had a long-standing debate, for 20 years about the nature of an invitation. We would get an invitation to go out to something, and he would automatically walk right to the calendar. And I would say, wait a minute, that's an invitation. That means now we have a conversation about whether or not we're going to go. And he's like, yeah, but they invited us, right? Extrovert, introvert. I was super like, well, I don't know if we have to go to everything, and he was like, but they invited us. And it was oh no, you guys are laughing, but it was like an ongoing thing. Two people standing at the calendar on the refrigerator going like, I don't know about that. So sometimes that social rest is actually important. If you are extroverted and you get more energy from being with the people, then social rest for you might be being around more people. For those of us who are a little more introverted, it might be pulling back from people a little bit. And then there's spiritual rest. So it may be a religious practice, it may be a mindfulness or meditative practice, but it also means just being connected to something that feels bigger than you. For me, that also can be nature. It can be the work that I do. I feel really connected to people all across the country who are doing really important things just because I do this job. So even my job sometimes feels nourishing to me, because I get that sense of like being connected to something bigger than myself. So ironically, even though sometimes my job can be stressful, it also means that it can be a great source of joy. And so there's some, tension there sometimes. But that sense of being connected to something bigger than yourself. I always ask myself, when do I feel awe? When do I feel humbled? When do I feel connected to things that I don't understand? Where do I feel joy and amazement? I'm always looking for those types of things. And again, that may be performance. Maybe it means going to a show and watching live theater. Maybe it means making something. For some people, this could be, again, being in the garden. I think that connection to nature can be so important. It might be hanging out with your animal. I know that when my dog Rosie and I are together, I feel deeply connected to something that I don't totally understand, which is a dog. But she and I are like completely united on our dog walk, and we do our thing together. And that I would consider some kind of spiritual rest, because I feel connected to something bigger than me. So that's really, again, for some people, this is religion. For some people, it's a spiritual practice. For other people, it may be defined more broadly. Now, I had that question about, well, how do we do this, if we're already feeling strain? Part of it is micro routines. Again, if you're waiting for the weekend or that one big thing you're going to do, or you think to yourself, I just got to hold on until my vacation. that's not actually going to be helpful to the brain. The brain needs consistent, tiny stuff all throughout your week. So I want you to think about it. It needs that for a couple of reasons, right? Number one, you don't want uncertainty in the brain, because what is the brain going to do? It's that set of circumstances that feel uncertain that are going to activate it, right? So I want to create lots of predictability in my day, but then I can interject some of these little things as micro routines. It doesn't have to be a big, huge thing. So a silly example that I have that I use in my trainings, and you guys can laugh at me if you want, it's totally okay. But my grandma June is one of my safe people. I always felt really safe in her home when I was growing up, and things weren't safe for me in my home of origin. So I always felt super connected to my grandma. And my grandma was kind of vain about her skin. And so she had lotion all over the house, but it was Jergens lotion. And if you guys know what that smells like, it's that like cherry almond, like you smell like an old lady lotion. And when the pandemic was coming, I was like, ooh, I'm going to need some micro routines. Like, how am I going to do this? Right. And so I got a big, huge bottle of Jergens lotion, and I use that like 3 or 4 times a day on my hands. Right. And when I smell that, I smell Grandma June, and my brain calms down, because it's a tiny little reminder like, oh, Grandma June, she's got your back. She's still here. You can smell her. And that calms my brain down just enough that I can kind of hit reset, and I'm like, okay, right now that costs me $3.50. It doesn't mean probably much to you all, because you probably just smell Jergens lotion. But for me, I smell Grandma June. And so a micro routine is a tiny little thing that I interjected into my day to make me feel better. And that's what I'm talking about. I need lots of those little things, because if the more I do them, the more I'm creating predictability, which is going to calm my brain down. And I'm adding in these little bits of things that are going to be helpful to me to manage stress. You think about high stress jobs. What do they have? A ton of predictability, right? They have uniforms, they have protocols, they have ways they do stuff. I do this check the same way. I used to work in an emergency department with neurology. Neurologists have a ton of things that they do the same way every day. There was one guy who wore the same tie every day, had like 5 of them, same tie every day. Why? Because when they created that level of predictability, they could handle whatever big stress came in the room. Right? Then they could focus, and they could be completely, but they ate the same salad, or they sat in the same chair, or they had the same pen. So I want you to think about how to make routine in your day. That's going to be really important. Another thing to be considering is that this wellness is multifaceted. I think sometimes, again, we get into this mindset of like, don't forget to do yoga, don't forget to eat kale. That's true, that's physical, that's important, but it's also about your holistic well-being, right? So if you are like eating a bunch of kale and your bank account ain't right, if anybody here's been broke, has anybody here been broke? Because I've been broke, like broke, like decide what to pay broke. Yeah, back in the day, like when you've been broke, like you can eat as much kale and do as much yoga as you want. And if your bank account ain't right, like nothing's going to be right, right? So you got to be thinking about like, where are those stress? Where do I feel stress? Where do I feel like, yeah, that needs a little bit of my attention, maybe more than the kale right now, right? So be thinking and challenging yourself. I'm guessing some of you are doing some of this super well, and there are probably some of these where you're like, maybe I could spend a little more time doing that, right? There's some challenge areas here for you, and identifying those for yourself will be really helpful. Then I always want to end on sort of thinking about organizational wellness, because there may be some leaders and folks who can think about systems in this room. And, these are the SAMHSA trauma-informed guidelines, right? This is how we build a trauma-informed organization. Really, for me, so much of it is about that sense of safety. Do people in my organization feel safe? Can they raise their hand if they feel as though they aren't doing okay? Do we have the resources they need? Are we thinking about sustainability for our programs? Are they constantly under stress because the grant might run out? Like all these things that I know impact us so much. But really, as a leader myself, what I'm constantly thinking about is holistic safety for the people on my team. And that's why I don't like the term self-care, because self-care, first of all, like I said, it puts the onus back on us, but it also takes away the role that systems have in creating the conditions for our wellness or our trauma. We have an opportunity to create systems and environments that either re-traumatize or are going to be healing for us. And that means schools, it means community-based organizations, health systems, you name it. But the reality is we know how to make organizations trauma-informed. We know what different types of policies and procedures could be for people. So this is something that we've got to consider. Again, if you're a leader here, you've got to be thinking about, how do I create that sense of safety? How do I create the conditions for wellness? Obviously, communities have these experiences too. And so that's part of the reason why we want to think about community care and not just always talking about self-care. These are the types of reasons, and I'm going to end on this idea of connection. Another reason why I think it's so important to not use self-care is because actually what happens in the brain is that we need connection to heal. Connection is the driver. Connection is what tells one brain, you're okay. And this is the slide that demonstrates that. This is a PET scan image of what safety looks like. This is a PET scan image of what brains do. They automatically sync together in safety. This is why I'm telling you this, you need this. You need the connection that feels safe. And what a trauma-informed organization is an organization that creates the systems and conditions where that can happen. That image is a powerful image because it tells us what our brains are designed to do in community. And this is why I'm saying self-care by itself, that's not gonna cut it. What we need is connection. So I want to go ahead and stop there. I know that we've got some questions here, and I know that I'm running up on time. So I have a question here. What's an alternative term instead of using self-care? I'm constantly using collective care or connection care, community care. I'm always trying to think about what are the systems and conditions that are going to support everyone's wellness. And for that, you need other people. Absolutely. I see what to do when the new safety or team bonding experiences built into mandatory staff meetings are actually triggering or re-traumatizing. That's an important question. Yeah, I see that all the time. People want to do trauma-informed practice and then it ends up being traumatizing. I think that if you can speak truth to power, if you have a supervisor or manager that you could talk to about that and to give some feedback about, hey, actually, I know you're trying to do this good thing, but here's my experience of it. That's what I would suggest, is to come at that from a solutions-driven perspective. Like, hey, this is my experience. Because most people who are trying to do that stuff are not trying to re-traumatize you, right? Most people. And so in general, if they get feedback that says, hey, this isn't working for us, in general, they will try to find something else. Or maybe you could come up with some solutions together. Nothing for us without us is a trauma-informed principle itself. So bringing people along into the decision-making is important.
Okay, with that, I have to say, Brooke, you know what I did during the last part of your talk is I pulled out a coloring book, my kids' coloring book. I have been using coloring pencils. I've been coloring
creative rest.
Turtles, creative rest. I do some
total creative rest.
Right? Yeah. And it's been soothing and just a great way to focus and listen. I've got this beautiful, so thank you for that. Thank you so much, Brooke. We always love having you. Thank you everyone for joining today. In the chat are links to the list of the 7 types of rest with some good concrete examples and also a tool that you can use to kind of create some strategies for yourself. So thank you for participating. Thank you for being here today. Everyone check out our website, nopen.org, connect with us if you have any other questions or things that you'd like us to focus on for future events. And we will see you next time. Thank you, everyone.